In my career, masterminds have been one of the biggest influencers on seeing my business go from one level to a whole other level. Now, a couple things that I like to do is I like to gather agents together where we can share ideas, we can ask questions, especially when we can do it with an industry icon leader like David Childers, the CEO from Keeping Current Matters. This is actually a replay of one of those Zoom masterminds that I did with a little over 100 agents where we had a Q&A time and we just kind of bounced ideas back and forth. If you like the slides that David shares in this, or to be invited to the next mastermind that I do, down below in the description area, you're going to see where you can opt in to receive an invitation to those as well as those slides from David. Now let's get to it. For those of you, I'm sure all of you know who David Childers is, in my opinion, the voice of real estate for North America. And one of the things I would say is that as you're going to see here when David starts sharing the screens, I've always kind of joked, Superman has his cape, David Childers has his slides. He's going to share his slides, give us some good information. And I will say this, David is, I know a lot of people in the industry. David's one of the smartest people, but let me just say this. He's one of the best people I know. He is my guy. He's my friend, and honor is not truly given in where I come from unless you speak it out loud. And I just want to say thank you, David, for your friendship, for your encouragement, for just the way you inspire me to be better. So thank you, my man. And I'm gonna just turn it over to you.
That,
okay,
Jimmy? The feeling's mutual, so I'm grateful for that and grateful for our friendship and just to be on today. And let me say this: I apologize for last week. I realized I've been on the road for the last, at that time, 6 weeks. I think this week 7 weeks. And that Thursday night when I called you, Jimmy, I realized I wasn't going to make it home that night, and that I was in a good spot, and ended up spending the night in Dallas, Texas, before I flew on home to Richmond, Virginia, on Friday morning, and missed that call. So I apologize for that. I'm glad that we can be on today. And again, I know we got a lot of folks joining, folks from all over. I saw somebody from Richmond. Tom, I see you there in Atlanta. I grew up in a little town outside of Atlanta in Gwinnett County, and love that area. And over here in Hilton Head, South Carolina right now. And Jimmy and I will be in Miami next week. And I don't know what else is after that. But, it's a huge honor and a blessing to get the chance to share the message of Keeping Current Matters, with folks. And this group is special, and we can, and Nate there in Vail, Colorado, great place to be this morning. See you there. I lived in Vail when I was in college. That's a different story for a different time. We had a good time though. But it's an honor to be on with you guys and get a chance to talk about this market. I was at an event yesterday, spoke a couple of times. Lonnie here in Hilton Head, a little cold this morning in Hilton Head, but got a chance to share with a group of agents, and also shared with another group yesterday of lenders. And I think this is the market where most people are kind of going, okay, we're here now. We've settled into what this market's been after a lot of transition. And I'm going to show you a couple of things. And I think this is the professionals market, Jimmy. I think it's the time that folks that are out there and diligent and, waking up every day saying, I want to make a difference out there in the community and out there in my business, certainly are the ones that are winning. So I thought what we would do, if this sounds good, and Jimmy, listen, speak up if there's something in particular you want me to cover. I think you said mortgage rates, but were there other things you're like, hey, hit on this as well? Because we can sort of duck and weave and do whatever we want to do, during this time.
I'd love to talk a little bit about economically where we are and kind of what that, what the potentials are going forward with everything that's happening, nationally, whether that be, effects of potential tariffs or, what does this look like going forward? So any of those things you can do to kind of give us an idea of where we are right now, and then kind of where you anticipate we're headed, and kind of what the predictions are of where we're going.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll do that. I'll do the best I can on that. Here's what I'll do maybe for the next few minutes. And Jimmy, as always, I'll send you all these slides, and you can figure out how to get them out to everybody if you got an email list or whatever. Is I'll cover a couple of things that I think are in the news right now that we need to understand and have a sort of perspective on. I'll then transition. Maybe I'll pause right there and say, hey, what questions do we have, or what things do we want to talk about in that? Then I'll move forward to really what I would say are 4 things we should expect in this market. And one of those we'll cover the mortgage rate scenario. So we'll kind of do that. And listen, stop me if you see somewhere you're like, hey, let's talk a little bit more than that, or let's go there. But it's all in the aim and with the goal of having a relevant market opinion. And oh, by the way, using facts in that, which I shouldn't have to say, oh, by the way, but right, there a lot of people have opinions in our business and they have nothing to do with a factual basis. Okay. And I always say this, I said it yesterday to the group that I was speaking for here. You don't have to agree with my opinion. You don't. But look at the facts and make the best opinion you have based on your market. Now, listen, I see folks joining from all over. Every market is not the same today. We know that for sure, right? Markets are operating in a different way. Florida, we'll be down in Miami next week, Jimmy. That market's operating differently than where I'm at here or where somebody's at, maybe on the West Coast or the Midwest or whatever the case is. And so I think the local market dynamics, as always, are critically important. But more than anything, have an understanding of what's kind of going on, so that you can give the best advice in your market. So I'm going to share my slides, and Jimmy, just let me know. Everybody see that? We good?
Got him. Got him.
All right, perfect. So how's the market? Question we get asked all the time. Let's kind of talk about that. I would say this too. I like to anchor maybe our time and our brains in a place. Donald Miller wrote his book called Building a Story Brand. He said, people don't follow the best leaders. They follow the ones they can understand the easiest. And that is for sure true in this world. People will follow someone that they understand. I get what they're saying, or I can resonate with that message. Politics is a great example of that, right? The one that tells the story that most people go, I understand, and I feel like that person's speaking to me, is going to get maybe more of the traction in the world. I think conversely, what is true as well is sometimes the most negative voices are the loudest voices, right? And people listen to that. And, I think one of the things happening right now, Jimmy, you mentioned tariffs and new administration and all the sort of wranglings of that, this talk of recession. Are we heading towards sort of an economic slowdown in this country? Recession is a term for an economic slowdown. Hopefully everybody knows that, understands that. The widely held definition is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP as, coining a recession. And so I think we need to understand that, because I think it creates a lot of fear, and specifically in buyers' minds, maybe not as much sellers, or I don't think anybody wants to buy anything when they feel like, again, recession is an economic contraction when they feel like things are going down, right? Nobody wants to buy on the downswing. So turn on the news, you hear the tariffs are coming, you hear all this sort of confusion with inflation and the job market and what's going to happen with everything. Oh, by the way, the economy may slow down. I don't think it's crazy to think somebody would go, I don't know if I want to buy a home in that time, right? It causes confusion in our minds. What we have to understand, and if you followed Keeping Current Matters, we've done an extensive amount of research in this area, is how does the real estate market perform in times like that, right? The past certainly is not a direct indicator of what the future will be, but we can learn from it, right? We can understand it. And if you go back all the way to the 1980s, there have been 6 recessions in this country. 4 times prices actually went up. Twice prices went down, once marginally in the early 90s. But what everybody remembers is 2008. Where homes lost almost 20% value. Never happened. Is interesting in the real estate market. That never had happened before 2008. Obviously, it hasn't happened since. Let's hope it never happens again. But we have to have an understanding of the facts in the market so that we can give people the best advice. Oh, by the way, I would make the argument every time somebody right now hears the term recession, they think housing crisis. Because of 2008. And we have to understand, I've said it several times, it wasn't a recession that caused the housing crisis back in 2008. It was the housing market that caused the recession. And we'll talk in just a minute about just the reality of this market, and what what we see and where this market is at. But the truth is, I'll show you this. I forgot I had this in there. We always include in the notes the source reports for anything that we do. So if you want to take this slide, Jimmy, I'm going to give it to you. You get it out to everybody. You want to share it. You can always have the confidence that you have the reports that made up this information, because somebody's going to go, where'd you get that information? You're going to send them that. You're going to copy it right there and send it to them. They're not going to look at it. Don't worry about it. But even if they do, you can have a conversation about it. I would encourage you to look at it, right, and understand it. But you can have the confidence to say this is what it is. Jimmy, go ahead.
David, I was just going to say, this is why I always appreciate when I'm sharing these slides down at the bottom, you always have it in writing down at the bottom, the sources, and then who it is. And so that's super helpful to make it easy for everybody too.
Yeah. So we can clearly look back and say it doesn't always mean prices are going to come down. Matter of fact, the majority of times prices went up. We can explain that. What it oftentimes means is a recession means falling mortgage rates, right? In each one of those recessions, mortgage rates came down. Why is that? Because it's sort of the spur in the housing market to sort of bring GDP back up. We know new construction and the transaction of buying a home is a tremendous portion of GDP in this country, and so sort of this lever that the Fed has to influence mortgage rates. They typically lean on that in a time like this. Now, what they don't want to do right now is in any shape, form, or fashion light the housing market on fire again, like they did a couple years ago. And probably, I think when we look back on this, it'll sort of be widely held. I think it is now that they sort of overcooked it last time, right? We brought rates down too low, left them too low for too long, and we kind of see what the effect of that has been. But I think having a relevant market opinion right now on what's happening with recession and what's happening with an economic slowdown, what's happening with potential impacts of tariffs. I believe, you asked Jimmy, like what's ahead for that. I tend to believe that the majority of this is political wrangling. Majority of it is, hey, we're going to do this. Do you, and it's sort of this way to influence policy, and we can debate whether that's an effective way to go about it. And I think there's good arguments, honestly, on both sides of you shouldn't be doing it that way or you should be doing it that. But I'll tell you this. Most things in this administration, they come out with a hard line. They're like, we're going to do this. And the other side typically goes, all right, we're willing to talk. We're willing to now communicate with you. And again, it's a strategy, I believe, that it is politically motivated. I'm not saying there won't be impacts, but I think we need to be very careful of not responding to this top line sort of media hysteria in any area. Let's see how things play out, and let's ultimately, make our decisions in that. I think the biggest issue we have in this country right now, by far, is debt. And I can cover that relative to our business, but obviously the national debt, as far as I know, there's nobody on the call that can have any influence on the national debt right now. But I will say, I do believe, verbally at least, this administration is saying we want to address debt, the national debt in this country. And listen, I'm all for it. I think everybody should be all for addressing debt because it's at a crisis level in the U.S. I mean, you can't, just like any of our households, you cannot operate your household, spending more than you make, maybe for a year or two or something, but you can't do that long term, right? We have to get a handle on it. So I think there's plenty more economically speaking to be uncovered. But I will say this too: if they are successful in addressing debt, that will be advantageous for the bond market, thus advantageous for mortgage rates for sure. Jim, you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah, David, I was just going to say, we just got Jackie had a question about, hey, since recessions are typically, two quarter timeline, if this is the case, kind of where are we? Are we early? Are we even sure that we're going to have that? Are we in the middle?
No,
of it, towards the end of it?
let's that's a great question, Jackie. I appreciate you asking that. We haven't seen a contraction in GDP. We're just saying we could be there. Are we there? Are we not? Will we be there in the future? I don't have a perspective on that right now. All I'm telling you is anybody that you work with is hearing that. They're being fed that in their minds, sort of in this. We've always said at KCM, headlines do more to terrify than to clarify actually what's going on. So whether we're there or not, we have to understand consumers are like, that's where we're heading, right? That's where we're going. The job of the news is to get you to watch more news. It's not to educate anybody on anything. Matter of fact, this, and I mentioned this before, I think this last presidential election cycle was the first cycle where podcasters had more influence than, media. Than the traditional, growing up, we used to turn on the news and you're like, all right, that's the news. Well, today, I don't think most people turn on the TV and look at the news and think, I believe everything they're saying, right? Or I trust that. And so we're seeing a changing dynamic there. Now, whether we're heading into a recession or not, I don't have a perspective on that. I think if we were, it would be a mild one.
Hey, David, let me add to that because you and I have talked about this a lot too. What we're seeing on the macro side of where literally the podcaster becomes the news source now, this is something as agents that we are seeing a tremendous movement across the country with those that actually become the source for information about not news, but source of information. So I'll give you a quick update. We had Katie Day on a couple of weeks ago. She started an account on Instagram called Houston, I believe it's Unlimited. I believe it is Houston.unlimited. And all she started doing was she did a reel a day where she would say Houston Airport, and she would do a green screen video about that where she would report on what's going on with the airport. Then she talked about Houston Zoo will be closed down. Then she did new developments, and she became kind of a source of information around the city. And since December, she's had over 1.5 million views on that brand new channel or brand new Instagram account. And it's just simply focusing in on being that source. So from that standpoint, obviously, David's talking about the macro. From a micro perspective for you as an agent, there is a ton of opportunity here for you it's Houston Unlocked. Thanks, Cole. Appreciate you saying that and sharing that. But that's a great, if you're looking for something, you're wondering what type of content and how do you become that source of local information, there are a lot of examples out there. I can get you more, but Houston.Unlocked that Katie Day's doing is a great example. So, David, I just wanted to mention that from an agent perspective.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that account and really, really neat strategy. And listen, this is great news for us, right?
Right.
That we now become the source. We now can broadcast ourselves. We now are seen, I believe, by the public, people that know, like, and trust us go, all right, I'm going to trust this person versus flipping on, the news or YouTube and somebody says, you know what, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. We got to watch.
Hey, David, just real quick. Zelda asked, what is the name of her podcast? The podcast that she does is RevB. It's Real Estate Video Blueprint. But the page on Instagram that I was referencing was Houston.Unlocked. And so that is available there. She was on with us about a month ago now, I think. And just while we're here, if anybody wants to join me, I know I'm going to be down there for her conference in San Antonio, the end of April. And it's the REVB conference for real estate video. But that's a great.
Yeah, good. She's wonderful. They do a phenomenal job. So let's kind of get this back on track. Recession, it's everywhere. It's sort of starting to boil up in media. The other headline that I tell you, if you haven't seen it yet, it's coming for you, is that new construction inventory is approaching 2008 levels. I don't know, Jimmy, if you've seen that, but you could literally Google it right now. It's out there. It's starting to sort of take steam. So let's go back to the mind of the consumer right now. You're telling me we got all this kind of political wrangling, tariffs, all these things. The economy might slow down, and now new construction is heading towards or at 2008 levels. Man, that doesn't sound good. right? You sort of left your own devices. You go, here we go again, right? A couple of years ago, prices went through the roof. Now everybody's kind of like settling down from that. I think a lot of businesses are kind of like, okay, we're ready to get things going again. We have to understand that too. And it's factually correct, but we need to understand it. This is a look coming from the census, new builds going all the way back to 99, January 2025, 115,000 completed homes on the ground, ready to go. Use my cursor here, right about here in this 06 time frame. Now, a couple things about that. One, that headline is used to drive eyeballs and go, that's where we're at. It's a twisted truth, if that's the right way to say it. And what happened after that in 08 is we spiked up in new construction. And then, we know the story of all that. Now, what's the reality today? Builders are trying to build, and builders are offering incentives and trying to move product, and mortgage rates certainly have slowed things down for them. But I'll guarantee you this: they're not going to let inventory go where it was back then.
Right.
They're not going to do it. Okay, so we have to have a handle on that and a perspective. I would have this one, on my these are great slides, Jimmy, for somebody to have on their phone. Right. Where you could just pop open or have on an iPad and say, let me show you a couple things that are happening in the market right now, so that if you see them, you'll understand and be better equipped to sort of process it. Right. I want to head off any question I can before it's asked. That's truthfully, if you want to be the true professional, you want to anticipate what's important to someone. You want to answer that question. Certainly, we go person by person on the call here today, and folks could probably give you examples of that. Of here's how I do that with the clients that I serve. But understanding this issue right here is key. Matter of fact, 32% of all inventory right now is new construction. So I think there certainly, we started off this call talking about the differences market by market. That's going to be, and I'm going to stop sharing here for a second. That's going to vary in different markets and different folks. That maybe there's more building, and Jimmy, you got a lot of builds down there in your market. Maybe somebody else over here doesn't have as many in their market. So I think those are a couple things that I tell you are in the news right now that I would be aware of, and sort of top of mind. I can give you another couple things, but I want to pause for a second. I'll give you one other thing that I think is probably a pretty big trend happening right now that will impact our business over the next couple of years, before we hop into what to expect for this year. But Jimmy, any questions on that or anything in the chat that we want to address?
If anybody wants to raise their hand, we can ask you to unmute as well. David, I think you're still in the host role. If you want me to reclaim that, I can, where I can kind of open that up for people. But here, I'm going to just reclaim it real quick. Look, if you got a question, either unmute yourself or raise your hand and ask away. A couple things I just wanted to add, David, is I completely agree. As someone who went through the 06 to 09 time frame, this is not that. I can just tell you, one of the things we're seeing locally is we are seeing builders pause on some projects right now, or slow down some projects. The construction accelerated in 2006 when we got there. I would also say that I don't think anyone would argue that we were woefully under. We had a woefully low number of new construction homes to what we needed over the last 7 to 8 to 10 years. And so I think this is more of a normalization than it is an exaggeration that we saw on the other end, in my opinion. Questions? Anybody want to jump in on any of these things? Cole, I saw you mention one thing also about that we're seeing some of the things. So if you can jump in, I'd love to hear your insight on that as well, on the household formations. Cole, or if you're available, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, sure. And I think I got that backwards. It's housing starts have not caught up with household formations yet. And I think,
Correct.
And I actually got this information, or some of it, from David, probably a year ago or so. You had a really good slide deck on that, and it just showed, leading into that 08 timeframe, how builders were overbuilding and not really paying attention to household formations. So that's a really cool slide deck. If David, you probably have it still on Keeping Current Matters, I'm sure.
I got it here right now. I'll show it to you.
Yeah,
great.
that's
Here, I'm gonna give you back the host, David. And and Cole, thank you. Cole is kind of my go-to source for mortgage information. Great lender out of the Dallas and serves nationwide. But yeah, thanks for jumping in, Cole. That's super helpful. So David, I got you back as host.
Yeah, so I'll show you that, Cole. It's great point there. There are two schools of thought. One is I'll show you the reality of why we're in a deficit right now. Maybe some of you have seen it, like Cole. But there is also another school of thought that is, I don't know if folks maybe heard of Ivy Zellman, who runs the Z Report. She's a Wall Street analyst in housing, very, very well respected, brilliant. She would make the case that we're at a point right now where we're overbuilding in this country. And the overbuilding case, you need to understand it, is based on a couple of things, that we are in an upward trend in builds right now. And in U.S. population, we are not growing at the rate new births in this country that we have been. We're not declining, but we're not growing at the pace outside of Elon Musk. I think he's the only one that's trying to keep things, heading in the right direction. But we're not growing at the pace that we were back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in this country. So, Cole, tell me if this is the one that you were talking about. This is really a great picture of builds in this country. So it's new single family housing.
You know what? Now you say that.
Got somebody. Let's see. I'm gonna make sure everybody can make sure they're muted.
Zoom it in.
We're zooming it in.
Yeah, I know. Hey, Iris, if you don't mind, if you can mute yourself. Let's see here. I think we got it now. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
So this goes all the way back to the 70s, shows every year how many single family housing units have been completed in this country. So the reality is in 70s, 80s, 90s, we built more homes in this country than we did in the last decade. Now, why is that? You see the red bars there, sort of to the right of center. Those were 4 consecutive years that we built more homes in this country than we'd ever built before. Never happened before, hasn't happened since. That's the lead up into the housing crisis, the mortgage debacle, which, oh, by the way, demand was inflated. You didn't have to qualify for a home loan. Like, hey, we'll buy it. We make $1 million a year, and we'll buy it. And then obviously the market goes through what it goes through in 2008. If you were a builder back then, you needed to feed your family. And oh, by the way, we had a ton of new construction inventory, and that adjustment, people walk, the term strategic default sort of originated during that time, which is we owe more on the house than it's worth, and we're just, we're going to walk. And so for the last 15 years in this country, we haven't built the number of homes that we've needed. You see those in sort of this orangish, brownish tint. And that creates the gap. That's the gap in housing. Oh, by the way, you want to know why prices have gone up to the degree they've gone up? That right there. You know why it's been so hard to find a home? That right there. This is probably the snapshot of this market in one graphic of the real estate market. Now, we could break it down further and talk about different issues, but builders are trying to build them. And we talked about, new construction on the rise and how much is on the ground right now. I saw a tweet yesterday, and I think it was really good. Byron Lazine from BAM said, look, the issue with new construction right now is not in the available inventory. It's in affordable available inventory. That's right. The reality. Affordability is at a crisis level in this country. And, most, I'm going to pull this down for a second and we'll kind of re-rack it and get going, affordability is a crisis level, and we need more of that sort of first-time home buyer product out there. And I think builders, listen, the way our U.S. economy works is somebody sees a need, they see opportunity, they capitalize on it, and they deliver a product to meet a need. And I think that will happen.
David, Debbie McCabe mentioned that in her market, and Debbie's in Pennsylvania, The real issue is the lack of resale inventory right now.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
think we're hearing that everywhere. What are you seeing there?
Well, I think by and large, inventory in this country, I can say this without a doubt, inventory is growing. Now, I'm going to break down a couple of things here in just a minute to give you a perspective on that. So let's pause that for a second, and I'll show you what's happening. The truth is, in the South, we're making progress on inventory. Where Rosalie, where you said up in the Northeast, there's still a pretty big deficit in inventory, and we can talk about that. But let me show you, Jimmy. Anything you want to add to that before I hop into probably a pretty big opportunity right now?
Yeah, no, I'd love to go into the opportunity. I would say you're exactly right. I mean, you and I were talking about this last week. I mean, I've gotten asked to speak in Massachusetts on how to generate opportunities for listings in a market where there is no inventory. And then you and I are going to be in Miami next week, and I was asked to talk about how to get inventory sold. And so I think it is very local. And I think what Debbie's talking about specifically, obviously, is we've got a lot of folks that are just holding on. I mean, they're just like, I've got this rate, and when there's uncertainty, they just stick. And so that a lot of times what happens with that also is we will see that inventory almost it backloads where we're not having the inventory here, and then it front loads on the front. So we're seeing some of this in these resort style markets where a lot of the people that were holding on a year or two ago are now releasing that. And so it's just, it normalizes over time. But yeah, go ahead, David. I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Let me mention one thing. I haven't talked to you about this, Jimmy. I was on the road last week. I was telling you, obviously missed the call. I heard one of the best questions I've heard in this sort of topic. So when you're talking to somebody right now that's sitting on a 2.5% 30-year fix, and they're like, we ain't going anywhere. We're going to be buried in this house. Like, we're going to be here. There's two sort of there's a dividing line that you want to establish. Is this a yes or no question? Like, do you want to move or do you not kind of thing? Or is this a timing question? Okay. So those are the two different ones. The question that I heard last week is asking a potential seller or the person in that sort of situation, what are the chances you're going to be in this home in 5 years?
That's a great question.
What are the chances you're going to be in this home in 5 years? And most that are thinking about it would say probably unlikely. So this is not a yes or no question at that point. This is a timing question. When should we? If I understand when should we, I can then have a logical sort of response to that. I can look at appreciation rates. I can look at, what's the sort of projection and what do I believe in the mortgage market? And we can say, hey, based on that, here's what probably makes sense. It may make sense today. It may make sense in a year. It may make sense at a different time, but it's not always a yes or no question. It can be a timing question for many people.
Yeah, it's really good. That's really good. David, where are you seeing some of these opportunities right now?
Let me hop into that. Let me show you a couple of things that are very interesting, and I think will have an impact on the mortgage market and the real estate market here in the next several years. First of all, the number of people turning 65 in this country will peak this year. Okay. The enormous amount of people turning 65. It's, been sort of deemed the great wealth transfer. You can go research it right now. I've talked about it before, but this right here represents a tremendous amount of opportunity. The number of people turning 65 in 24, 25, and 26 will be enormous, probably the height of this transition. Those folks, I can tell you right now, want to help their kids and their grandkids buy a home. Oh, by the way, after COVID, nobody wants to go into a nursing home. I can tell you that. They're going to age in place. Maybe they're going to have a motivation to get closer to their grandkids, whatever it is. But if you're not paying attention to this market, highly encourage you to do some research on the great wealth transfer, to understand who, how you're addressing that market. Oh, by the way, you go back to the NAR's profile of home buyers and sellers, and we clearly know tenure in homes is rising, right? If you grew up in the business, everybody moves every 5 or 6 years. That was traditionally how things were held. '08 comes along, that bumps up for a lot of reasons. Some people just couldn't go anywhere, right? They didn't have the equity or they didn't have the means to be able to do it. Now we have people aging. We have people living in their homes a lot longer. We know there's more equity in homes than ever before. And so as a student of our business, I want to understand this. I mentioned this before. I'm on a kind of a text group with several people in our business, and somebody put in there, I heard that almost 40% of homes in this country are owned free and clear. And that's true. 39.3%.
Yeah.
29% are equity rich. 31% have less than 50% equity. More equity in homes than we've seen in quite some time. And I can show you this over time as well if you want to see it. So aging population, tremendous opportunity to help those people accomplish the goals they want to accomplish. We know tenure is growing in homes for a lot of different reasons. And listen, oh, by the way, the last couple of years are going to make that rise even higher with the number of people that are like, we're sitting on a preferred mortgage rate. We don't want to do anything. And oh, by the way, the balance sheet, if you will, of the homeowner is extremely strong. So I want to kind of, that old saying, it used to be in the GPS, the map will appear when the car is in motion. I can tell you the map is starting to appear in real estate in this country. The opportunities that are there, we want to be aware of as marketers and as communicators, and ultimately helping people accomplish the goals they want to accomplish. So I want to pause there for a second. I'll get in here in 4 things to expect in just a minute, but want to see if we have any questions, Jimmy, or anything there.
Let's see. We got something from Jackie here. I'm just going to mention this. She said most seniors are opting to wait until one of the spouses passed away to get their step up basis to get and become tax-free transactions. And so she's just kind of making a note of some of the things that we're seeing with this senior market, I guess you could say. And and those are things I think we're all seeing. But this is an interesting concept, David. We have not talked about this, but when we're talking about people repositioning, based on life, things that happen in life, this is a group that obviously you need to pay attention to. Let's see here. Brenda says, how do you think what you just covered relates to the resort market? And David, I'll ask you, and then I can speak to that as well if you'd like.
Well, Jimmy, you're in a resort market. I'll tell you, a lot of these folks have a second home.
Yes.
That's how I feel about it. You can probably speak to it better than I can.
Yeah, I will tell you, Brenda, one of the things that I've focused on in my career throughout this is the understanding that a lot of times in the second market, these become assets that get shifted less than the norms that you see in other places. In other words, in our market right now, the average time frame is still the 5 to 6 years of home ownership in our markets. As far as the senior side of this, we are seeing them also hold on longer. And a lot of it, because of in our resort market, it's being utilized by the children, and in a lot of cases by the children that may not have the assets that the parents have and the grandkids. And so it is something there. Where we've really found an opportunity, it has been in the probate side of resort markets. And the reason I'm saying that is there's less emotion involved in a lot of cases. And, it's one of those where it's easy to identify who it is. And in a lot of cases, those are motivated sellers because they do, once they are named the executor of the estate, whoever that is, they have the ability in most states to be able to list and sell the property on behalf of the estate. And so part of their job is to liquidate assets or to get assets distributed. So we're seeing that opportunity in these resort markets as far as a consistent opportunity for people to find and identify ways that they can really help people that need the help at that time. So from that standpoint, the aging population, I don't want to get to the death side of this, but that has been an area where there have been it's a great way to be able to help people because they don't know anybody locally. They don't have resources for, goodwill, for people that can clean up the house, people that can serve that house. And a lot of times you've got executors that are out of state. So just pay attention to those things, I would say, is a great area. Anybody else have anything? Or David, you want to add to that?
Jimmy, we had a comment that a lot of people are moving into RV parks
Yeah.
and that there's a lot of movement in the condo industry in these markets. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I will say in the condo markets in Florida, a lot of it is affected by the legislation that we had on, making sure that we had the tragedy down in Miramar, down in Miami area where the condo, collapsed years ago. And that led to some legislation that is hopefully being worked through right now, but they had to have a lot of these studies done on what is the situation as far as each of these condos. So the aged condos, a lot of those have been receiving increased HOA dues, and they're also seeing reserves where they're having to do some special assessments. We've seen that substantially here. So consequently, statewide, and especially in our market, we're seeing this, and they're seeing it in Miami as well, South Florida as well. We're seeing where a lot of these are coming in. And David always talks about affordability. Well, when you start looking at condos, in a lot of cases, those are investment properties. And so when you have the cost associated with ownership go up, whether that be for insurance, whether it be for assessments, whether it be, interest rates obviously affect that. When you see the things we've had happen over the last year and a half, the condo market is getting hit at a little bit of a higher level than even our single family homes are in resort areas, especially in Florida. So yes, the reason why we're seeing the inventory swell is that there are people, I had somebody tell me this last week that owned a condo that we sold this past week. We closed on it 2 days ago. And she said, we own this condo outright. And I never understood where people would tell me, where I would hear the generation ahead of me say, we own our house outright, but we can't even afford to keep our house now that we own it. Well, now I can begin to understand that, especially in the condos where we saw a doubling of the expense on a few of our condos here as far as the amount of monthly HOA dues. And it's just pricing some of these folks that have owned these things for a long time out of the market. And hence, when you have more inventory come, simple supply and demand, and you have less buyers because of the pricing and the affordability, then prices are starting to come down. At least we're seeing that pretty substantially here in our markets. And it's going to, look, the market will work itself out in the condo market, but we're definitely in a place where there's opportunity for buyers that are selective, and sellers that want to get sold are going to have to be aggressive on their pricing. Hopefully that answers that.
Also insurance too. We've had a lot of issues with that here. I'm sure you have in Florida as well.
Absolutely. Nate, that's one of the biggest issues here. We have, part of the reason why is that we did not have a lot of insurers coming into the state of Florida because of the way that we were set up, where a company could come by, a homeowner could sign off their rights to get a roof put on, for instance, and the roofing company could then just do the work, then and then bill the insurance company, and they would tie them up in litigation, and it was just a mess. It has been handled at the state level as far as legislatively, but it takes a couple years for that to happen. So good news is I've got a friend of mine that is on the Florida State Insurance Commission. He had told me that we have had new providers that have come in over the last 6 to 12 months that are going to substantially help, but it takes time for that to work itself out. So hopefully, they can look, insurance companies can handle fire. They can handle the understanding of how many anticipated storms they're going to have. They can base that and do all of their numbers to be able to come with a policy rate. The problem they can't do is that when you have all of this litigation that they've had, that is something that is harder to plan for. So stability in insurance is critical, and in Florida at least, we're starting to hopefully get some stability legislatively that's going to help on that.
Yep.
And David, we have a couple questions and statements about the equity that's sitting in these homes, especially for that group you were showing. Fawn mentioned that she's holding a casual homeowner session for people to help them figure out what to do with this equity. But Patrick's asking, do you see where they're using this? Are they buying investment properties, second homes? You mentioned helping their children. Where do you see this equity being used today?
Well, there are a couple of things. It's a really good question. There are a couple of things I would say about that. Surveys show us right now that the intent of the homeowner that's in that age bracket wants to use the proceeds of a sale or equity in their home to benefit their children and grandchildren. and the way they ask these surveys, the majority of people say, yes, I want to do that. I mean, they recognize that affordability and, the challenge of purchasing a home has gotten more difficult in the last few years, and they want to do that. I think there are two things in this market right now that we don't know the long-term effect of. One is the enormous amount of people that have a preferred mortgage rate on their home and how that will play out. Certainly in the mortgage business, it will sort of tamper refinance cycles in the foreseeable future. I don't think everybody's going to stay in their home, but I think it'll have an impact. And two, we don't know the impact of all of that equity in homes right now and how it will be put to use. But my personal belief is that it will be put to use, whether it is buying a second home or doing something else. But we haven't seen that fully play out yet.
And Tim is mentioning that he's seeing more ADUs and in-law quarters being asked for through the buying process. Is that national?
Well, I think it's limited to some markets. California is certainly a big ADU market, but I was in San Diego a few weeks back, and they got folks up in arms about ADUs there and trying to, bring in legislation to prevent those. But I do think it's an option, to have a, if you're not in a market that has ADUs, accessory dwelling unit, think about that as a kind of it's not a shed, but it can be like a building.
Carriage house.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Carriage house. We call it here.
So somebody was talking about one. I'm like, you want me to call my mom and tell her we're going to put her out in the shed here in the backyard? It's not that, but yeah, you have like a little home that somebody could use or rent in some of these markets.
Yeah. Yeah. And David, I'd love for us to go ahead and get to the four things.
Yeah.
I will say, I just saw this morning the post that Fawn did in Knoxville about having that. And I think that is something that people should really consider. I thought it was really, really smart to provide the ability to share with people. And I think she's leaning from a standpoint of having the ability to tap into that equity to own investment properties. And I thought that was brilliant. So you could probably,
I think covering some of these numbers, Jimmy, like imagine you have a session, maybe a smaller session, 10, 15, 20 people, and then open it up. What are you thinking about doing? What are you thinking about doing? Creating almost like an atmosphere like we have right here. Hey, here's something that I'm seeing in my market, or somebody over here says, we're thinking about buying a house at the lake, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. And being the facilitator of those, conversations is always going to lead to, to uncovering opportunity. So, all right, let's hop in this. Well, what can we expect for this year? I was at an event. I kind of have all these event stories because we've been around the country. It feels like the last several weeks. I was at a deal the night before an event. I was talking to somebody, and she said, what the hardest thing about this market is we do not know what's ahead. And I said, well, show up tomorrow. We'll talk about that, and I'll give you that. But I want to show you a couple of things that are becoming very apparent right now in the market. I do believe these are four things you can't expect to happen in the real estate market this year. I believe there are things that you can help people, educate people on, and help them make a confident decision, right? You can feel confident in saying, okay, I do understand. I do see what's happening in this market. And it's pretty clear when you start to break this down. So first of all, I would say we should expect inventory to grow in 2025. This is a look from Altos Adam, Realtor.com. They say somewhere between 10 and 15% inventory growth in this country throughout the year. Now, I want you to stay with me on this because I'm going to sort of give you this this picture of inventory, but there's still plenty more people that want to buy a home in this country than there are available homes. The question is, can they afford them and can they buy them? We should have a perspective on affordability. I'm not going to cover that today, Jimmy. We can do that one day and come back. I'll give you all the things that affect affordability, and you need to develop your opinion on those in that. But inventory should grow. Oh, by the way, this is the graphic I was telling you. This is a look at the, if you kind of look with my cursor here, the Midwest, the Northeast, the South, the West, and, the U.S. as a whole. Blue bar is year over year. Every market has grown in inventory year over year. The red bar is the deficit of inventory back to pre-pandemic levels. Okay, so 2017, 18, 19, I would call the last normal years in real estate. Okay, so the story of real estate in this country is, The pandemic comes along, mortgage rates fall. Everybody says, we'll take one. Nope, we'll take two, actually, because we can afford them now. We deplete inventory across the country. Price spikes up, and we're coming out of that in just about 2 seconds. I'm going to show you a couple slides that very well sort of visualize that. But remember, Rosalie, I can't remember who asked the question, Northeast, still down 58, almost 60% from pre-pandemic levels. The South right here, only down 7%. That becomes interesting, right? So the variances in markets are pretty wide right now, speaking relative to inventory. So let me give you the sort of the visual of this. This is a look at the historical nature of listings coming to market going all the way back to 2017. So start off sort of slower in January, kind of peak around May, June, and tail off towards the end of the year. That is the historic seasonality in people bringing their homes to market, okay, and listing counts. So where are we at right now? This yellow bar, February 2025, this is from Realtor.com. The bars below yellow are the last 4 years, sort of the green and orange, yellowish tint. In the red in the middle there is 2020. So 2020 comes along, inventory's depleted, and we're starting to work our way back. The top, I think it's gray and blue there. That's 17, 18, and 19. And it just gives you this sort of 5-year visual of what's happened to inventory in this country. So let's sort of stay on this line, and let's imagine that inventory grows by 10%, which would be the bottom threshold that forecasters are saying about this market in 2025. Well, if you play that scenario out, it starts to look like this. That sort of dotted yellow line, that's sort of a forecast of what would happen with inventory in that scenario. What do you notice here? We end this year very close to where we ended 17, 18, and 19. And you see it. Remember when I said it becomes very clear in these scenarios that this 5-year cycle of depleted inventory across the country, we're working our way back. And there are factors that weigh into that. We won't go into all of those today, but you then start to see, you can start to give people the confidence that, hey, I understand this market. Let me explain to you what's happening. You certainly could recreate this for the market that you're in and say, hey, here's what's happening. We have more inventory, we have less inventory, we have price challenges, we have plateauing price, or even slightly declining price, or rising price, whatever the case is in your market. But the inventory piece becomes very clear. So what's the first thing you should expect? You should expect more homes to accumulate an inventory on the market as we go throughout the year. You should expect for us to sort of wrap this year somewhere in the neighborhood of where we were pre-pandemic, which, by the way, is a good thing for the health of the market. One thing a word that I would be consistently using right now is we are returning to a more healthy market, a more healthy real estate market, not the unhealthy market that we saw a couple of years ago. Okay. So inventory, first point right there. I'm going to run through these maybe, Jimmy, and then we'll kind of pause and do some questions. Second, JP Morgan right here says they expect house prices to rise by 3% overall in 2025. You should expect very historically normal price appreciation in real estate this year. JP Morgan right here says 3%. If you look at this, this is updated consistently. This is as of 2/20, so about a month ago. These update maybe on a monthly basis depending on what it is. 2.8% is the average of these 22 forecasters. What's the headline that always comes out? Zillow's readjusted their forecast for home price growth. It's 0.9, 0.9%. Well, there's still a lot of people saying, look, we're gonna end up somewhere in a very normalized scenario in price growth in this country. What I think is important, if you were to ask me, I'd say somewhere between 3 and 5% likely. in home price growth nationally in this country. But there's not this case to be made for a national decrease in value of real estate out there. And I think that's important. Again, going back to recession talk, growing inventory talk, what's ahead talk, inventory will grow. It will have an effect on price, right? Supply and demand, more items on the market. That has an effect on price. Less items on the market, that has an effect on price. And so understanding these dynamics are key. Second thing I would say, very normal price appreciation. We talked about the builds. That is the reason for the steep rise in price. We're coming back, and that is sort of moderating, is another word I would use, moderating prices across this country. I don't think I have this slide in here, but one of the words you'll hear as well is a deceleration in price. And deceleration, all that means is it's not rising as quickly. But if you were to sit down with somebody right now, Jimmy, and you said, hey, guess what? Prices around here are decelerating. They're like, that doesn't sound good. I don't know if I don't want to be involved in any deceleration, right? It just means they're not rising as quickly, which is, oh, by the way, a good thing. A lot of this will be driven by the path of mortgage rates. Still the majority of people that buy a home in this country need to finance that purchase. They're not independently wealthy where they can just pull out the checkbook and write a check. I will tell you the consistency of forecasters is that sometime in the second half of the year will be somewhere in the 6.5% on the 30-year fixed. I looked at it. I think we're about 6 3/4 right now as an average on the 30-year fixed. I get a chance to speak to some lending groups from time to time. I think there are groups that have different preferred pricing and things like that can get lower, but no doubt this is a market that you need somebody that's going to help your clients navigate the lending side of things. And how do we buy this house given sort of the issues? And look, this is a look right now, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate going back to the first of the year. We've already seen some relief on it. And Jimmy, you asked where we're at. I'll tell you the quick answer of where I believe we're at in this economy relative to the mortgage scenario is that bad news is good news, right? So anytime you hear some of the bad news that's coming out economically, it bodes well oftentimes for mortgage rates. And there's probably people on the call that could explain that better than I can even. But I think we're going to see is if we see inflation stay under control, we see this sort of pay attention to the debt in this country. We see that those are going to bode well for the bond market and ultimately for the mortgage rate market. We don't want to see, inflation is always going to be the enemy of long-term borrowing rates. And that's what we've seen over the last couple of years. And I think we all want to see inflation sort of settle down in this country. Nobody wants to pay more for eggs or anything like that, at the grocery store. Last thing here, and then I'll pause for a second. We should expect more homes to sell in 2025 than we sold in 24 or in 23. Now, not blowing the doors off by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not saying that, but we will ultimately sell more for a couple of reasons. One, people that put off the decision to buy a home. Two, a little bit, incrementally better rate in borrowing to buy that home. That'll unlock a few people that are able to buy, and that's ultimately a good thing in the mortgage market, and a good thing for folks that are buying in there. So I think there are perspectives on this market that we can have, that we can say, okay, here's what I see. Here's what I expect. I expect more homes to come on the market. I expect price to be very normalized. I expect mortgage rates to improve. I expect nobody probably that we're working with, Jimmy, cares about how many homes we sell in this country. We do, right? All of us on this call do. But we should expect that to improve.
Measured improvement, I guess you could say, on a lot of fronts. Couple things. Peter mentioned that he was asking about, hey, he's out in California also. He's saying, hey, are you seeing data that's showing that the 65 plus crowd is starting to sell assets, homes, or transfer to the kids? Because they're not necessarily seeing that out there. It seems like the seniors are just holding tight, thinking they will outlive their retirement potentially. Any data on that?
I don't think we're seeing anything right now. My message right now is be aware of it, because I believe that's coming. You know, one of the things that they call it as well, they coined this term, the silver tsunami, right? This thing is coming. We want to be ready for it, right? If there's a tsunami coming, I want to get out of the way, right? I don't want to get hit by it. And this one, you want to be ready for it as it comes to it. But I don't think we're seeing that by and large right now, but certainly we'll see some of that happening.
Hey, wasn't the silver tsunami one of those wrestlers from around that Atlanta area where you grew up? I'm just kidding. Totally kidding.
It might have been.
No, totally kidding. So a couple things. Cole mentioned, do you happen to have that slide? He said, I think it was a few years ago, that talked about the number of annual births over the last 40 to 50 years. He was just saying that had pretty compelling data comparing 2008 to now. I know that's probably an older one, but if you do, maybe if you don't have it handy, maybe I can get it from you a little later.
There are a couple things you want to watch right now. I can go pull that. I don't have it on me. But what I will say is, I mentioned this before, and I don't know if this is the direction that you're asking the question. 2024 will go down as the slowest year on record in real estate when adjusted for population growth. So that is a compelling sort of graphic, because population growth has gone like this. We're basically at 95 levels, 1995 levels of sales. And by the way, 25% more people live in this country today than they did back then. But there are some sort of generational and age demographics that we want to pay attention to right now in real estate.
Yeah, that's good. The one thing I wanted to mention, David, for all of the agents that are out there, you and I had talked back, right before the end of the year, and you had brought up the information that we had gotten from RedX and about, the anticipated number of expired listings the first week of January. And what I wanted to mention to agents is there's a couple things here that, I know we saw a ton locally, more than I'd seen in 20 years on that weekend and that first week. You have to understand also from a marketing standpoint, as an agent standpoint, what that does to create opportunity. I've always talked about the 6 to 12 month listing, but you have to understand those that expired that first week, which is typically the largest week for expirations of homes, that are listed. We're now sitting here right now, March 21st. So we're basically roughly 80 plus days since those houses, 70 to 80 days since those houses expired. Most MLSs across the country have it where, at least in our market, 91 days after being off the market, a home that is relisted shows up with no cumulative days on market. And there is a direct proportion to the list to sale price to the number of days on market. And so if you're looking for an opportunity, those expired listings that expired that first week, they got hammered with calls from agents. I mean, obviously they got call after call after call. Those that did not relist are not getting the same number of calls now 80 days later. Majority of agents, they drop off after the first week, maybe one call, possibly 2 or 3. So a great opportunity if you're looking for inventory in your market is to go back and find that week, and over the next week or two to have those conversations. Just say, hey, look, and always use the terminology. I noticed where you pulled your place off the market at the beginning of the year. Just curious if you have plans to put it back on the market, but because we're coming up on a benchmark date where you would actually, going back on the market, would not have the cumulative days that your home had been on the market. It would show up as a brand new listing. And there's a direct proportion from list to sales price. In other words, the amount that you would receive in relation to your list price by being a new listing. Just curious if you guys have considered getting your place back on the market. So it's a great opportunity window here in about 2 weeks to really have some conversations specifically in that area with some of the details and data that David had provided earlier in the year. Let's see, a couple things. Let's see. All right, Cynthia, any pearls of wisdom to share with buyers in the DMV? Lots of grumblings due to federal government firings, layoffs. David, you want to mention anything there? And I've got.
Well, I live in Richmond, Virginia, 90 minutes away from there. I will tell you right now, unless there's something I just don't know, and that certainly could be the case. We're not seeing a mass, sort of flood of homes on the market. I will be in DC on Monday with the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors. And we'll have more of that. I certainly can share it with you, Jimmy, I find that out. But again, I think a lot of these things are driven by, I'm not saying people aren't going to be impacted. A lot of return to work for federal workers is impacting that. Some of these folks, I think, could unfortunately, lose their employment. We don't want to see that. Don't want to see anybody lose their job. Right. But I don't know that it's having a dramatic effect that I know of right now in that market.
Right. Sure.
But it's also a chance to help people, right? I mean,
right.
It's funny. It's not funny. I mean, it's ironic. I was down in Florida a few weeks ago and was with some agents from LA where, neighborhoods have been destroyed. I mean, destroyed, not just the house, but like, imagine you live somewhere and everywhere you went was destroyed too.
Yes.
Everywhere you went, the shop,
infrastructure.
I mean, everything is gone. Crisis, right? And there's been so many agents that have stepped up and helped and done amazing things. This is a chance, obviously, in the DC market to, help and be a service to folks. And so I think everywhere, out there, when these things happen, we're able to help folks and make a difference.
Yeah. David, one other thing, I know it was asked earlier and we didn't get to it. Any direct result, tariffs, we just need to let this thing play out and see what it looks like? Or
I think it's political wrangling right now. I'm not saying there won't be impacts. But generally speaking, our position at KCM, and I would encourage you to adopt this when you're talking economically, is I'm going to wait until this becomes law or legislation. Good. Because if you don't, you're constantly responding to what could be. And again, my personal belief is this administration uses the tactic of we're going to do this, and then to force the other side, no matter whether it's a tariff, whether it's whatever it is, to a position of what they believe is strength, number one, or the desired outcome, or whatever that is. I mean, you clearly see it in that. And again, I want to go back to, we could all probably have a conversation whether you agree or disagree on that tactic, but it's one they're using for sure. And I would say in a lot of cases has been fruitful. It's been one that moves the needle. So I would say, let's see how this stuff plays out. And let's see where we end up ultimately versus the headline of this is going to happen. And we just don't know yet.
That's great. Any other questions for David? David, thank you. This has been tremendous. I got a couple pages of notes here myself. So anybody have any additional questions right now? Hey, Larry, I see where you were asking any advice for the Southwest. Look, you and I can talk a little more. I'd probably want to know a little more about your specific market there in your area to be able to speak to that. But you and I can definitely talk about that offline if that's okay. Anybody else have any additional information or questions? All right, David, thank you so much. And guys, what I'll do, David, if you can forward me those slides, after you and Hadley have a great day. And then,
I'll do it right now. I'll send you because listen, we're going to go out and have fun now. So
I know you are. I know you are. I'm excited for y'all. And so, what I would just say is everybody, look, if you're not a member of KCM, go to Try KCM. It is my source. It has been for years and years. They do, in my opinion, the best job of being able to position us as agents to have the information to get our professional opinion on things and be able to speak truth into any questions that we have. So, David, do you want to add anything to that? Also, anything y'all have got going on or anything that I missed?
No, love it. If you're not a KCM member, we'd love to have you. And I believe this is the market where you need to have access to this information. I mean, this is the difference maker in understanding what's happening. Giving great advice.
I completely agree. All right. It's like Joe's unmuted, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. And everybody have a great day. Again, thanks, David, and we'll see you guys later.
Have a great Friday. Good to be on.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the video. I specifically chose the video below for you because it builds on the one you just watched. I hope it's helpful, and I'll talk to you soon.